Zeitgeist, the defining spirit or mood of a particular period of history as shown by the ideals and beliefs of the time. It's very hard to remove yourself from the time in which you live. In thinking of the zeitgeist of fashions, we are particularly influenced by what is fashionable, but it is deeper than that. Our ideals of beauty and our aesthetics about what is desirable is ingrained in us. It's hard for us to truly see our own bias in this regard. Let's look, for example, at the designs of Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. This movie is set in Oregon Territory in 1850, but MGM made the film in 1954. The costumes, designed by Walter Plunkett, have a distinct 1954 flair. You can see this by looking particularly at the hair and makeup of the women, and especially at the bodice shapes that conform to the 1950s ideals of beauty. Compare this image of the leading characters from Seven Brides for Seven Brothers with the one from There's No Business Like Show Business with Marilyn Monroe and Donald O'Connor, also from 1954. They have the same popular hair and makeup, and Marilyn is wearing the popular fitted bodice shape of the early 1950s that we saw in the ladies in the previous slide. The photo on the right shows what a couple from 1850s would actually have looked like. The zeitgeist of 1954 requires a skewing of the period shapes from what is historically accurate, so that the contemporary audience would find the characters relatable and attractive. Another consideration is that Seven Brides for Seven Brothers is a musical, where they're doing lots of dancing that couldn't be done in the tight, severe clothing that is more accurate to the period. There is also a heightened color palette as a convention of the musical genre. Let's look at another set of examples. Cleopatra was a real-life woman who was an Egyptian queen. She's been portrayed many times in films over the years. In the photo on the left, we see Theda Bara in her version of Cleopatra in 1917. The photo on the right is the costume of Claudette Colbert in 1934. Here's Elizabeth Taylor playing Cleopatra in 1963. Does this yellow dress remind you of a fashion icon, maybe Marilyn Monroe from the 7-Year Itch? Compare the shape of these dresses. The 7-Year Itch was filmed in 1955.
Here is Theda Bara again. Compare the shape and decoration of her dress to this beaded evening gown of 1917 on the right. Can you see how the silhouettes, the outer shape of the garments, are the same in both dresses? The natural waist is not accentuated, but instead the emphasis is put on a long, slender body with design details at hip level. Here we can compare Claudette Colbert's Cleopatra costume from the 1934 on the left with the metallic draped bias evening gown from the 1930s on the right. These dresses show a remarkable similarity, a clear example of the zeitgeist of the 1930s influencing this costume design. Even though Cleopatra was the queen of Egypt, she was from Macedonia and may actually have looked more like these images. I'm using these examples to show you how a modern aesthetic and the ideals of beauty color our interpretation of history. Let's look at these interpretations of space uniforms from 1960s science fiction television shows. On the left, we have Lost in Space, that was set in 1997. It was filmed in 1965. You may be more familiar with the images on the right from Star Trek, which was shot in 1966, but set in 2260. Even though these shows are set 263 years apart, their aesthetic is decidedly from the mid-1960s. Our ideals of what the future will look like change according to the zeitgeist of our times. Here we can compare futuristic uniforms with the popular disco styles of the 1970s. The image on the right is Robert Fletcher's designs for the first Star Trek movie that was made in 1979. But remember, in the Star Trek world, it's about 2270. Here we can see a different version of futuristic uniforms from 1982. The influence of the 1980s can easily be seen seen in the stronger shoulder shaping of the uniforms and the hairstyles of these men, who are undoubtedly curled with a generous supply of hairspray. The closer we get to our own present time, the harder it is to see the bias of our time. The image on the left is from the movie Interstellar, which is roughly set in 2070. This aesthetic is so close to our own that it looks very realistic when compared to the current space uniform of astronaut Scott Kelly in 2014. Also, this is no longer futuristic. This is actually a photo from the past. Here we see the hotly contested designs of the popular Netflix series Bridgerton, designed by Helen Marajnik. The show is meant to be set in Regency England in the early 1800s, but the production design has deliberately chosen a non-historic, colorblind cast and used modern bright fabrics and chosen accessories and design details that more accurately suit the characters and story than historic accuracy. In conclusion, I like to mention that while there are many who would appoint themselves as fashion history police, ultimately the decision to be historically accurate or to follow the more familiar zeitgeist of the current times rests with the costume designer. There remains a balance between ignorance of the correct historical details and deliberately choosing not to follow them in the interest of using costumes to more fully tell the story.